Don't make it bigger than what it is, sis. Those words did more than calm me down. They jarred me into paying attention to what I was doing with the way I was thinking. My brother had said those words to me many times. Usually, when we talked on the phone, at some point I would start telling him about all the things I was trying to manage. And that situation itself was real. But while I was talking, my thoughts would begin adding weight to it. One demanding moment would start to feel like my whole life. One uncertainty would begin to sound like a prediction about the future. One difficulty would start to feel as though everything depended on getting it exactly right. Then he would say, "Don't make it bigger than what it is, sis." Something about those words made me stop. They helped me see that I was not only experiencing a difficult situation, I was also having thoughts about that situation. And those thoughts were shaping the way I experienced it. That awareness eventually led me to study the role of the power of our thoughts. I began to see that maintaining clarity and alignment is not only about making the right decision, it's also about the thoughts you continue to have about who you are after the decision is made. And that is what I want to talk about today. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here listening into the podcast. And we are continuing with this series. We're coming to the end of the series, and I now want to share with you more about making aligned thoughts. All right, so I started to tell you about my brother. He lived in New York at the time, and I lived in California. So we didn't see each other, so we used the phone often to stay connected. So we talked. Usually it was a casual conversation, just kind of unplanned the way siblings do. Sometimes we laughed, sometimes we caught up on what was happening in our lives. But many times when we talked, I'd share about one thing or another that I had on my plate. There was always something: teaching, writing, responsibilities, deadlines. And, I'd be feeling stretched. And my words would come out as quickly as my thoughts were moving. I'd say, "Oh, I have so much to do," or "It feels like a lot." And he would listen. And he didn't tell me that what I was dealing with was unimportant. He didn't pretend that everything was easy or that I should just get over it. He listened long enough to understand what was happening. But he also seemed to recognize the moment when I was no longer only describing the situation, I was beginning to enlarge it with my thoughts. The facts might have been that I had a demanding week. My thoughts could turn that into, "I feel like I'm not going to get all of this done." That was usually when he would say, "Don't make it bigger than what it is." His words interrupted the momentum of my thinking. They gave me a little space between what was happening and what I was telling myself about what was happening. Now, the problem didn't disappear. The work still needed to be done, but the emotional exaggeration began to loosen its hold. I could see the situation more clearly. One difficult day was not my entire life. At first, I mainly experienced his words as grounding. They brought me back to the situation in front of me instead of everything my mind had begun to build around it. But gradually, I started noticing something deeper. I began paying attention to the thoughts themselves. I noticed how quickly a thought could become an assumption. I noticed how easily an assumption could become a belief. And I noticed how a belief about a situation could eventually become a belief about me. A hard experience could become, "Oh, I don't know if I could do this." A delay could become, "Oh, I am so behind." The more attention I paid, the more I realized that our thoughts influence how we understand ourselves. They affect the choices we believe are available to us. They shape what we're willing to try, what we tolerate, what we avoid, and what we assume is possible. That realization became especially important as I reflected on my own career decisions. And throughout this series, I have shared turning points that helped me recognize parts of who I was. I learned that work could look successful on paper and still not be right for me. I learned that making a difference mattered to me. But meaningful work was not enough if the work itself didn't allow me to use my natural abilities. I learned that passions mattered. I learned that important parts of who I was needed to be present when I made decisions. Each experience helped me recover a clearer understanding of who I really was. But recovering that understanding was not the end of the work. Because even after you recognize what is true about yourself, the way you think can gradually pull you away from it. Pressure can do that. Expectations can do that. Fear can do that. Past conditioning can do that. You can make a decision from a clear sense of who you are and then begin questioning it from the part of you that has been trained to seek approval, avoid risk, maintain appearances, or do what other people expect. You can know what fits and still have thoughts that tell you to ignore it. And that was the largest lesson I was beginning to see. It was not enough to become aware of who I really was. I also needed to become aware of the thoughts that either supported that awareness or pulled me away from it. The decision in this story was not one dramatic career choice. It was a quieter and more ongoing decision. I decided to start paying attention to the thoughts operating within me. Instead of automatically treating every thought as true, I began to notice it. Instead of assuming that a fearful thought represented the truth, I began questioning where it came from. Was the thought grounded in who I really was, or was it shaped by fear? Was it coming from clarity or from pressure? Was I responding to what actually happened or was happening? Or had I made the moment bigger than it was? And there was another side to that question. Sometimes we don't make the situation bigger than it is, we make it smaller. We minimize our dissatisfaction. We dismiss our exhaustion. We tell ourselves that something does not matter because acknowledging it, how much it matters, might require us to make a change. We call a persistent problem temporary. We explain away a part of us that has been trying to get our attention. So paying attention to my thoughts did not mean trying to make every situation feel better. It didn't mean that. It meant becoming more honest about what was true, not bigger than what it was and not smaller than what it was. I also began making time to quiet my mind. That could mean spending time in silence, meditating, or doing something else that allowed the noise in my thinking to settle. The point was not to force an immediate answer. The point was to create enough inner quiet to notice which thoughts had been running automatically and which ones reflected a deeper understanding of who I was. This became an important distinction in how I approached decisions. I didn't want to make a major decision only from the self that had been shaped by expectations, appearances, or past conditioning. I wanted to renew my awareness of who I truly was and allow that awareness to guide the decision. The decision itself was not where the transformation began. The transformation began with a renewed understanding of who I was. As I began studying the role and power of our thoughts, I began reflecting on how you can be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And transformation does not necessarily mean becoming someone entirely different. It can mean awakening to and expressing more fully who you really are. And I began to understand that self transformation comes from releasing the thoughts, beliefs, conditioning that have kept parts of you hidden, quiet, or disconnected from the way you live and work. From that perspective, Transformation is not about creating a new identity. It's about remembering who you really are and letting that awareness change the way you think. There's a difference between the self you have learned to perform and the deeper truth of who you are. There's a difference between the thoughts you inherit from other people's expectations and the thoughts that allow your own life and work to feel honest. There's a difference between the identity you created to succeed and the fuller self that is asking to be expressed. For me, renewing the mind became a process of replacing limiting and fear based thoughts about who I was with what I think of as best feeling thoughts about who I was. Now, by best feelings, I don't mean choosing whatever thought feels easiest or most pleasant. I mean choosing the thought that feels more truthful, more freeing, and more aligned with the deepest understanding of who I am. I'll give you an example. A fear based thought might be, I have to figure out my entire career now. A more aligned thought might be, I can listen to what is calling for my attention now and take the next step that reflects who I am. A fear based thought might be, if I make the wrong move, everything will fall apart. A more aligned thought might be, when I decide from a clearer understanding of who I am, I'm moving in a more truthful direction, even when I cannot see every turn. A limiting thought might be, I'm behind. I should be further along. More aligned thought might be, my understanding of myself is continuing to unfold, and I can make decisions from what I know now. Now, that doesn't mean putting a positive statement on top of a thought you don't believe. It's not pretending that fear is not present, and it's not talking yourself out of legitimate concerns. It's a purpose-aligned process. First, you become aware of the thoughts operating within you. You notice the thought without immediately allowing it to define you. You recognize that having a thought is not the same as the thought being true. Then you begin releasing your identification with it. So instead of saying, this thought is who I am, you can begin saying, this is a thought I am having. That small distinction creates space. It allows you to examine whether the thoughts reflect your deeper truth or whether it was shaped by fear, pressure, expectations, appearances, or past conditionings. Then you turn inward. You quiet the mind long enough to reconnect with the deeper awareness of who you are. For some people, that may happen through silence or meditation. For someone else, it may happen through prayer or reflection or walking or writing or another practice that allows the mind to become quieter. The specific activity may be different. The objective is the same. You're creating room to remember who you really are before the loudest thought makes the decision for you. You're creating purpose-aligned thoughts, and I call those thoughts purpose maker thoughts. Purpose maker thoughts are thoughts that help maintain alignment with who you really are. They are your mental home base. They help you maintain deeper clarity, lasting fulfillment, and alignment with your true purpose. Not because they eliminate fear or uncertainty, but because they keep bringing you back to the self from which clarity and fulfillment can grow. If purpose maker decisions, like we talked about in the last episode, are decisions made from who you really are, purpose maker thoughts are the ongoing way of thinking that helps you continue living from those decisions. And that matters because clarity can be lost when you stop focusing on the truth of who you are. Fulfillment can become temporary if your thinking keeps leading you back toward the same patterns that caused you to leave yourself behind. And alignment can weaken with fear, with pressure, or performance when performance becomes the loudest voice again. Purpose maker thoughts help you keep returning. They remind you that your true purpose is not simply something you accomplish. Your true purpose is to be and to express who you are. The career you decide on matters because it becomes one of the places where that expression happens. The decisions you make matter because they can either support that expression or restrict it. But the thoughts you continue to have about yourself are what help you remain connected to that truth over time. That's why transformation begins before the decision. It begins when you renew your understanding of who you are. Now, you may be at a career crossroads right now trying to decide what comes next. You may be asking whether you should stay or leave, change directions, pursue an opportunity, or create something new. Those are real decisions. But before you focus only on the decision itself, it may be worth paying attention to the thoughts you're bringing to it. Which thoughts feel as though they came from a deeper awareness of yourself? And which ones sound more like fear, expectations, appearances, or past conditioning? You may be thinking, I just don't want to disappoint anyone. Or it's too late for me to change. Or I should be grateful. I should not want anything different. Or you might be thinking, I have already invested too much to reconsider this. And those thoughts may feel familiar. They may have been with you for years. But familiar does not always mean true. You may also notice thoughts that make the situation bigger than what it is. Thoughts like, oh, this decision will determine the rest of my life. Or thoughts like, if I don't know the whole plan, I can't make a move forward. Or thoughts like, if I feel afraid, I must not be ready. You may need to right size those thoughts, so to speak. In other words, make those thoughts the right size. This decision may matter deeply, but it may not require you to know every step. You may be afraid, but fear doesn't automatically mean the direction is wrong. You may not know the full plan, but you may know enough to recognize the next aligned step. And you may also need to notice where you have made something smaller than what it is. Perhaps you've been minimizing how disconnected you feel from your work. Or perhaps you've been treating a long-standing pattern as though it were only a difficult week. Perhaps you become so skilled at pushing through that you've stopped asking what the pushing is costing you, physically, emotionally, mentally, and otherwise. The goal is not to make yourself feel better about every situation. That's not the goal. The goal is to think more truthfully about who you are within the situation. That may require you to quiet your mind before trying to force an answer. It may require a little space away from other people's opinions. It may require you to notice the difference between the self that knows how to perform and the deeper self that wants to live and work more true to who you are. The most important question may not be, what should I do? It may be, who am I allowing to make this decision? Is it the self shaped entirely by pressure, expectations, and conditioning? Or is it the self that has begun remembering who she really is? The decisions will still require courage. There will still be practical concerns. You will still need more information, but the quality of the decision changes when it begins from a renewed sense of awareness of who you are. Now, throughout this entire series, I've looked back at one career decision and turning point at a time. And if you may notice, I did not have a master plan. I didn't always understand what a decision was teaching me while I was living it. But looking back now, I can see how each one revealed another part of a larger pattern. One decision helped me recognize what didn't fit. Another showed me that meaningful work was not enough if it didn't allow me to incorporate important parts of who I was and to express those. And others helped me understand the importance of making decisions from the whole of who I am. Together, those experiences gradually shaped the understanding that became my Purpose Maker work. And this episode brings this particular series to a close. And it feels fitting to end here, not with one final career decision, but with what helps us continue living from the clarity those decisions reveal. Because remembering who you are is not a one-time experience. Maintaining alignment requires you to keep renewing your awareness of who you are and paying attention to the thoughts that guide the way you live and work. So, as we close this series, I just want to leave with you that Purpose Maker thoughts are how you continue to return to deep clarity, lasting fulfillment, and alignment with your true purpose. So, with that in mind, I want to leave you with this one question for reflection. What thoughts about who you are may be shaping the career decision in front of you? And is it true to who you really are? Take some time and think about that. And keep in mind, you don't need a perfect plan before you move forward. Sometimes the pattern only becomes visible one decision at a time. And transformation can begin by remembering who you already are and allowing that truth to guide your thoughts, your decisions, and the career life you continue creating. Okay, that's our episode for today and the end of our series. I'd love to hear from you. Follow me and connect with me on all social media, but I spend most of my time at LinkedIn. So at Robin L. Owens, PhD, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin.